Your name?
My name's Gareth Kantor, and my mother's name is Lena Amato, Lena Rachel Amato, or Lena Raquelina Amato. Raquelina, I think, was her given name, and she was born March 17th, 1936, on Rhodes Island. So her story is something that I grew up with. It was not something that I discovered later on, because my grandparents, Albert Amato, and my grandmother, Rebecca, Renata Amato, are the people that I grew up with. So I'm half Sephardic and half Ashkenazi. My father was born in Cape Town, South Africa, and his ancestry is Eastern European, Lithuania, Poland, Russia. But my upbringing primarily was among my mother's family, speaking Ladino and sort of imbibing that culture to a large extent. Although interestingly enough, my father apparently was somewhat unhappy about us sort of speaking Spanish, which I suppose might have been an outcome of that upbringing amongst my grandparents and with my mother. Perhaps he regrets that today, I don't know. But one of my regrets, not that I want to begin with a regret, is that I never learned really to speak Ladino. I have an ear for it. I think that I probably understand quite a lot of it, but it's a regret that the continuity of the culture is not going to happen with me. I don't think it has very little likelihood of that. You know, my mother's wartime story is an interesting one. For us, I've told this story a few times to audiences, and the way we have been able to put the story together is around the story of three pianos. My grandmother Renata was a classically trained pianist, and with roots in Italy, and studied piano in Italy. And a piano was an important part of the life at home, so I'm told. And the war story, if I can jump to it, is that sometime after the German occupation, two SS officers arrived at the home of my grandparents, and they had heard that there was a piano, and they demanded to be given the piano to take away. And the story in the family is that my grandmother was outraged. She said, we need the piano, I teach piano, and you may not take it. And the officers must have been surprised by this reaction. And my grandmother insisted on being given a receipt for the piano, and took it away, apparently for use in the German army officers' mess. There was a second piano, and that piano they decided to conceal. They took the legs off it. It was a baby grand Steinway piano, and they concealed the piano, covered it, and apparently laid a mattress on it and slept on it. And those pianos are still in my family's possession. The piano that was slept upon is in my possession. It's in Cleveland, Ohio, of all places, where I lived for 10 years. And the upright Steinway piano that was taken by the German army officers is in my mother's possession, and we play piano on it together. So music.
Tell me how your mother was saved from the roundup.
So anyway, we call the story the three miracles. So the first miracle is that my great-grandmother was a Turkish subject. She refused to take Italian citizenship when Italy took over the Dodecanese. And we are told that she, possibly with the help of some neighbors, interceded or approached the Turkish consul for help, indicating that she was a Turkish subject and that her daughter and son had been taken into the internment area on Rhodes Island. And as we know, this gentleman interceded on behalf of 42 of these people who he placed under his protection, and they were released from holding and therefore not deported along with the rest of the Jewish community to Auschwitz.
So your mother would want to go.
My mother was not held in the Navy barracks. My grandparents were. My mother was taken by a Italian Catholic family by the name of Sotgiu, Sotgiu, and for a period of weeks, perhaps, or days. I'm not exactly certain of the timing, but she was taken by them, and in fact, she talks about how she was made into a little Catholic girl. She learned the Mass or the Catholic prayers, and her parents were taken away. So my grandparents were released and reunited with my mother, and then spent several months on the island in fear of their lives. They were afraid that any moment the Germans might come back and take them away as they had done with the rest of the community. So I think that's sort of a second miracle. And then one day, apparently, the Germans disappeared from the island, departed on some ships. My grandparents and my mother then were able to hire a fishing boat, and that fishing boat took them on a perilous journey from Rhodes to Turkey, to Marmaris. During this crossing from Rhodes to Marmaris, a storm came up, and the boats were in danger of sinking, we're told, and they were all bailing out, helping bail water out of these fishing boats. And in the middle of the storm in the Aegean, suddenly they were rescued by another fishing boat. It came upon them, and they were transferred to this boat and taken to Marmaris, where they spent the remaining months of the war in Turkey. And my mother remembers this as quite a happy period, and she remembers her arrival in Turkey as being, a miraculous event, a miraculous journey.
When did you hear this story for the first time? How old do you think you were?
I must have been a young boy, maybe. In my recollection, the story came to me in bits and pieces. Obviously, I knew somewhere along the line that they were from Europe, from Greece. My grandfather was a big part of my life, and both my grandparents. So I learned to play the piano myself on one of these pianos with my grandmother, and spent many days in her care. And my grandfather was a very literary man. So he had an enormous library of books in French and Italian and in Spanish, and he used to relate to me and to my siblings the stories of the Hoja, Nasruddin Hoja, who's a figure in the Levant, the wise clown, if you will. So we learned stories of the Hoja from him. He loved Cervantes and the stories of Don Quixote. He used to
Your mother is here. Your mother is here with you.
My mother is here.
In Rhodes.
Yeah. But So my grandfather, was very dear to us, and very wise and patient, and also a funny man. So, and he loved us dearly, and I think about how he was ripped away from this world of Europe and culture and music and poetry.
Do you remember any of did he try to teach you any Ladino songs?
He used to recite a lot of Ladino sayings.
Yeah.
I wish I'm not someone who has a very strong sort of verbal memory, but he did give us, try to impart a lot of those sayings. He taught me some rude words in Turkish, which I don't know. We'll leave that off the recording. But he was a man who spoke 7 languages.
And this story, your mother's story, grandmother's story, grandfather's story, it motivated you during your life as you got older, obviously. You spoke about it publicly?
I have. So I about 4 years ago, I put together a presentation with slides and so on, talking a little bit about Rhodes itself, and then about this story, which around the music and the 3 pianos of our family, and the 3, we call it the 3 miracles of how my family survived.
And your children?
I have 2 children. I have 2 daughters.
And what do they know about this story?
And they know some of the story, that they've sat through it. I don't think they know any of the Ladino. They've had spent some time with my mother themselves, and I think they don't know enough about it. Perhaps I think the language is a big part of it. So having
Speak to them
in English, and so occasionally she'll throw out some Ladino. But what my brother and my sister and I were immersed in was the Ladino.
Right.
And I think my children have lost that, and are married out of the faith, as we say.
So your siblings, you have siblings, right?
Yes, and they're both here.
And do they also share your passion for understanding the story?
I think so, maybe even more so. And they're both. I mean, the fact that they're both here, I think, speaks for that fact.
Very wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, it's an amazing heritage. And we're here to celebrate it, I guess. Thanks.
Great.